Part 1. The Unexpected Assignment. The morning started like any other Tuesday for Captain James Whitmore. He woke up at 5:30, made himself a strong cup of tea, and put on his crisp Royal Guard uniform. After 15 years of service, the routine had become second nature to him. But today would be anything but routine. James worked at one of Scotland's busiest international airports, where his primary job was coordinating security for high-profile visitors. Presidents, prime ministers, celebrities, they all passed through these gates, and James had seen them all. He prided himself on treating everyone the same, whether they were royalty or regular travelers. Rules were rules and security was security. Around 9 in the morning, his supervisor called him into the office. The man looked a bit stressed, which was unusual. He was normally calm and collected even during the busiest times. "James, we've got a situation developing," his supervisor said, sliding a folder across the desk. "There's a diplomatic coordination happening today. Several high-profile aircraft are coming through for refueling." James nodded. This wasn't uncommon. Scotland's location made it a popular refueling stop for transatlantic flights. "What's the concern?" "One of the planes belongs to Donald Trump. He's flying back from a business meeting in Europe. The American Secret Service has requested we conduct our standard security sweep, but they're being very particular about the protocols." James raised an eyebrow. He'd dealt with American security teams before. They were thorough, professional, and usually pretty easy to work with. "Particular in what way?" His supervisor leaned back in his chair. "They want everything by the book, but they also want one of their own agents present during the entire inspection. Apparently there's some sensitive equipment on board, and they don't want any confusion about procedures." "That's reasonable," James said. In his experience, international cooperation worked best when everyone was transparent. "When do they land?" 2 hours. I'm putting you on this because you've got the experience and the temperament. This could be politically sensitive, so I need someone who won't get flustered." James took the folder and stood up. "Understood. I'll prepare the standard checklist and coordinate with their team when they arrive." The next 2 hours moved quickly. James reviewed the protocols for inspecting private aircraft, made sure his equipment was ready, and briefed his assistant on the situation. He also read up on the latest security advisories, just to make sure he wasn't missing anything. When the plane landed, James was waiting on the tarmac. It was an impressive aircraft, a Boeing 757 painted in cream and gold colors with Trump written in large letters on the side. The plane gleamed in the afternoon sun, and even from a distance, James could tell it was maintained to perfection. 3 black SUVs pulled up near the aircraft. Out stepped several men and women in dark suits, the unmistakable look of Secret Service agents. They moved with practiced efficiency, securing the area and setting up a perimeter. One of them, a tall man with graying hair and sharp eyes, approached James. "Captain Whitmore? I'm Agent David Rodriguez. I'll be accompanying you during the inspection." James shook his hand. "Good to meet you. I've got the standard security sweep protocol here. Should take about 45 minutes depending on the size of the interior." Rodriguez nodded, but James noticed something in his expression. The agent seemed tense, more so than the situation warranted. James had worked with American security teams dozens of times, and there was usually a professional courtesy, almost a relaxed confidence. But Rodriguez seemed on edge. "Before we start," Rodriguez said, "I need to make something clear. This aircraft contains some items of a sensitive nature. Nothing dangerous, nothing illegal, just personal effects and business documents that require discretion." "That's fine," James replied. "I'm not here to read anyone's mail. I'm just checking for security threats, prohibited items, that sort of thing." Rodriguez seemed to relax slightly. "Good. Let's get started then." They walked toward the aircraft together. The stairs had been deployed and another agent stood at the entrance. As James climbed the steps, he couldn't help but notice how quiet everyone seemed. Usually there was more chatter, more casual conversation. But today the American team was all business. The moment James stepped inside the plane, he understood why people talked about it. The interior was unlike anything he'd seen, even after inspecting dozens of luxury aircraft. Gold fixtures everywhere, cream-colored leather seats that looked like they belonged in a high-end hotel, polished wood panels and lighting that gave everything a warm, expensive glow. "Impressive," James said, keeping his tone neutral. He wasn't here to judge anyone's taste, just to do his job. Rodriguez walked beside him as James began his inspection. The cockpit area was standard, nothing unusual. The pilots had already disembarked for their break, so James checked the instruments, the storage compartments, and the security systems. Everything was in order. Moving into the main cabin, James methodically checked each section. Under seats, overhead compartments, the small galley area where drinks and meals were prepared. He used his equipment to scan for anything unusual, any electronic devices that shouldn't be there, any materials that could pose a risk. Rodriguez watched him closely, answering questions when asked but otherwise staying quiet. James noticed the agent kept glancing toward the back of the plane, toward what appeared to be a private compartment behind a closed door. "What's back there?" James asked, pointing to the door. "Private quarters," Rodriguez said quickly. "Bedroom, bathroom, office space. Standard for this type of aircraft." "I'll need to check it as well," James said. "Standard protocol." For a moment, Rodriguez hesitated. It was brief, barely noticeable, but James had been doing this job long enough to catch it. Something was making the agent uncomfortable. "Of course," Rodriguez finally said. "Let me just inform the team." He pulled out his radio and spoke quietly into it. James couldn't hear the full conversation, but he caught words like proceeding to rear compartment and confirm protocols. When Rodriguez turned back, his face was professionally neutral again. "All clear. Let's continue." They moved toward the private section of the plane. As they walked, James's instincts were telling him something was off. He'd done hundreds of these inspections, and they usually followed a predictable pattern. But today felt different. The tension in the air was real, and he couldn't quite figure out why. Rodriguez opened the door to the private compartment, and James stepped inside. It was even more luxurious than the main cabin. A large bed, a private bathroom with gold fixtures, a desk with executive chairs, and several storage areas built into the walls. "I'll need to check all the storage compartments," James said, pulling out his checklist. "Of course," Rodriguez replied, but again, there was that hint of tension in his voice. James began opening cabinets and drawers, checking each one methodically. Clothes, personal items, some electronics, all normal. But then he reached a larger storage area near the back of the compartment. It was locked with a heavy-duty security seal. "What's in here?" James asked. Rodriguez's jaw tightened slightly. "Secure storage, personal documents, and business files." "I'll need to verify the contents," James said. "It's standard protocol for any locked or sealed storage on an aircraft." The agent pulled out his phone and made a quick call. James waited patiently. He wasn't trying to be difficult, but his job required thoroughness. Locked compartments could contain anything, and he needed to ensure there were no security risks. After a brief, hushed conversation, Rodriguez ended the call. "All right, let me get the authorization to open it." As they waited, James looked around the compartment again. Everything about this plane spoke of wealth and power. But something was definitely making the American security team nervous, and James was about to find out what it was. His radio crackled to life. It was his supervisor checking on his progress. James gave a brief update, mentioning he was in the final stages of the inspection. What he didn't mention was the growing sense that this routine sweep was about to become much more complicated. Rodriguez returned with another agent, who carried a key and some kind of access code device. "We're ready to open the compartment," he said. "But I need to remind you that the contents are sensitive in nature." James nodded. "Understood. I'm just here to ensure there are no security threats." As the second agent began unlocking the compartment, James noticed both men exchange a glance. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but it was there. They were worried about something. The lock clicked open, and Rodriguez pulled the door wide. Inside were several boxes, some made of metal, others of reinforced cardboard. They were marked with various seals and labels, though James couldn't read them clearly from where he stood. "I'll need to verify the contents of these boxes," James said, stepping closer, and that's when everything changed. Because what James was about to discover would turn a routine security sweep into an international incident that would follow him for the rest of his career. Part 2. The Discovery. James stepped closer to the storage compartment, his training automatically kicking in. Rodriguez moved beside him, close enough that James could sense the agent's nervousness. The boxes inside weren't neatly arranged like you'd expect personal luggage to be. Instead, they looked hastily packed, some with official-looking seals that James recognized from his security training. I'll need to document these, James said, pulling out his camera. It was standard procedure to photograph anything unusual during an inspection, especially items in secured storage. Rodriguez held up his hand. Wait, before you do that, let me explain what you're looking at. James paused. In 15 years of doing security sweeps, he'd heard that phrase before, and it rarely led anywhere good. I'm listening, he said. The agent took a breath. These are personal records and documents. They're protected under various privacy agreements and diplomatic protocols. There's nothing dangerous here, nothing illegal, just sensitive paperwork. James looked at the boxes again. Some had markings from government agencies, official seals that indicated they contained classified or restricted materials. His pulse quickened slightly, not from fear, but from the recognition that this situation was more complex than a routine inspection. Agent Rodriguez, James said carefully, I appreciate the explanation, but I still need to verify the contents. If these are government materials, there are specific protocols for transporting them, especially on private aircraft. Rodriguez's face tightened. Captain, I understand you're doing your job, but this is a delicate situation. These documents belong to the former president. They're his personal property. James had dealt with diplomatic complications before, but this felt different. He pulled out his phone and took a step back. I need to contact my supervisor. This is beyond the scope of a standard security sweep. Wait, Rodriguez said, his voice taking on an urgent tone. Let's not escalate this unnecessarily. Maybe we can work something out. But James was already dialing. One of the first rules he'd learned in security work was that when something felt wrong, you didn't handle it alone. You followed the chain of command and let the people above you make the difficult decisions. His supervisor answered on the second ring. Whitmore, what's the status? Sir, I've encountered a situation. The aircraft has secured storage containing what appears to be official government documents with various agency seals. The Secret Service is claiming their personal property, but I think this needs higher-level review. There was a pause on the other end. James could almost hear his supervisor thinking through the implications. Don't move anything. Don't let anyone remove anything. I'm bringing in the senior coordinator and contacting the liaison office. Stay with those agents. Understood, James said, ending the call. Rodriguez had been listening to the conversation, and when James looked at him, the agent's expression was resigned. He pulled out his own phone and walked a few steps away, speaking in low, urgent tones. James stood near the compartment, not touching anything but keeping his eyes on the boxes. He could see labels now more clearly. Some said presidential records, others had classification markings. One box had a seal from the National Archives. The second agent who had helped open the compartment spoke up. This is going to become a whole thing, isn't it? James nodded. Probably. But that's not my decision to make. I just follow protocol. Rodriguez finished his call and returned, his face serious. I've contacted Washington. They're sending instructions. In the meantime, I've been told to cooperate fully with your investigation. I appreciate that, James said. He meant it. International incidents didn't happen because people followed the rules. They happened when people tried to cut corners or hide things. Over the next 20 minutes, the situation escalated rapidly. James's supervisor arrived with 2 senior officials from the airport security division. The Secret Service team grew from 3 agents to 7. Someone set up a temporary command post in a nearby hangar. James was asked to give a detailed account of what he'd found. He described the locked compartment, the boxes, the markings he'd seen. He showed them the photographs he'd taken before Rodriguez had asked him to stop. One of the senior officials, a woman named Patricia who had been in security management for 30 years, studied the photos carefully. These are definitely official seals, she said. This isn't just personal mail or business papers. Rodriguez stood nearby, listening. With all due respect, the former president has the right to possess his own presidential records. This isn't a violation of any law. Patricia looked at him. That may be true, Agent Rodriguez. But transporting potentially classified materials on a private aircraft through international airspace requires specific protocols that don't appear to have been followed here. The tension in the room increased. James stayed quiet, letting the senior people handle the diplomatic aspects. His job had been to find potential security issues, and he'd done that. Now it was up to others to determine what happened next. Another Secret Service agent arrived. this one clearly senior to Rodriguez. He introduced himself as Special Agent in Charge William Bennett. He shook hands with Patricia and the other officials, his demeanor professional but firm. "Let's all take a breath here," Bennett said. "I've been briefed on the situation. We have some documents in secured storage on the aircraft. Captain Whitmore was doing his job by flagging them. Now we need to determine the appropriate next steps." Patricia nodded. "Agreed. But until we can verify the nature and classification of these materials, the aircraft remains grounded." Bennett's eyes widened slightly. "You're grounding the plane?" "Temporarily, yes. This is a security matter that crosses international boundaries. We need to ensure everything is properly documented and cleared." James watched as Bennett processed this information. Grounding the aircraft was a serious step, one that would definitely attract attention. But Patricia was right. They couldn't just let potentially classified materials leave without proper verification. Bennett pulled out his phone and stepped away to make a call. Rodriguez looked at James, his expression unreadable. "You know this is going to become a major headache for everyone involved." James shrugged. "I didn't create this situation. I just found it." "Fair enough," Rodriguez admitted. "For what it's worth, you're handling this professionally." "Not everyone would. I'm just doing my job," James said. It was his standard response, and he meant it. He didn't care about politics or personalities. He cared about security and following the rules. Bennett returned, his face grim. "Washington is sending a team. They'll be here in 4 hours with the proper authorization and documentation to review everything. In the meantime, the aircraft will remain here under joint custody of your security team and ours." Patricia agreed to the arrangement. Additional security was brought in to guard the plane. The temporary command post became more permanent with tables, chairs, computers, and communication equipment. James was interviewed 3 more times over the next hour, each time by different officials who wanted to hear exactly what he'd found and how he'd found it. He told the same story each time, sticking to the facts, avoiding speculation. Around 6 in the evening, his supervisor pulled him aside. "You should probably head home, get some rest. This is going to continue into tomorrow, possibly longer." James nodded, but he felt oddly reluctant to leave. This was his discovery, his case, and walking away felt strange. What happens next? The Americans are sending legal experts and archivists. We're coordinating with our own government officials and the Foreign Office. They'll inventory everything, determine what's what, and then decide on the proper course of action. And the plane stays grounded until this is resolved. Could be days, could be weeks. James thought about that. Grounding a former president's aircraft for weeks would definitely make news. The media would get wind of it eventually, and then everything would explode into public view. As he drove home that evening, James's mind kept replaying the day's events. He'd started the morning expecting a routine inspection. Now he was part of what could become a significant international incident. His wife noticed his distracted mood during dinner. "Rough day?" "You could say that," James replied. "Found something unusual during an aircraft inspection. It's turning into a whole situation." She knew better than to press for details. After 15 years of marriage to a security professional, she understood that some things couldn't be discussed, at least not until they became public knowledge. That night, James had trouble sleeping. He kept thinking about those boxes, about the seals and markings, about Rodriguez's nervous energy. Had he done the right thing? Absolutely. But doing the right thing didn't always make life easier. His phone buzzed at 11:30. It was a text from his supervisor. Media starting to ask questions about aircraft at airport. No comments to anyone. Official statement being prepared. James replied with a simple "understood" and put his phone away. So it was starting already. The story was getting out. By morning, his quiet discovery would become headline news and his life would never quite be the same. Part 3. The investigation begins. James woke up to 17 missed calls and twice as many text messages. His heart sank even before he checked his phone. The story had broken overnight and it was everywhere. The headlines varied, but they all said essentially the same thing. Private aircraft grounded in Scotland. Security incident at International Airport. Mysterious documents found on plane. Some of the more aggressive tabloids were already speculating about classified materials and international conspiracies. His supervisor had sent the most important message at 6 in the morning. Do not speak to media. Do not discuss case with anyone. Report to office at 800 for briefing. James got ready quickly, skipping his usual breakfast routine. His wife gave him a concerned look as he headed out the door. "Be careful," she said. "This looks like it's going to get messy." She wasn't wrong. When James arrived at the airport, the scene had transformed overnight. News vans lined the perimeter fence, cameras pointed at the terminal. Security had been doubled at all entrances. The normally busy airport felt tense, like everyone was waiting for something to happen. He was directed to a conference room where Patricia and several other senior officials were already gathered. Also present were two people James didn't recognize, a man and woman in formal business attire who had the look of government lawyers. Patricia started the meeting without preamble. "As you're all aware, the situation has become public. We're managing media inquiries through official channels. No one, and I mean absolutely no one, speaks to reporters without authorization." She looked directly at James. "Captain Whitmore, you're going to be under intense scrutiny. The media will try to contact you. Your neighbors might be approached. Stay silent. Refer everything to our communications office." James nodded. He'd expected this. The woman in the business suit spoke next. She introduced herself as a representative from the Foreign Office. "We've been in contact with the American State Department throughout the night. They're taking this very seriously. A joint investigative team has been assembled to examine the contents of the storage compartment." "What does that mean exactly?" asked one of the other security officers. "It means," the Foreign Office representative continued, "that experts from both countries will inventory every item in those boxes. They'll determine what's classified, what's personal, what's presidential records, and what, if anything, shouldn't be there." The male lawyer, who worked for the airport authority, added his thoughts. "We need to be prepared for this to take considerable time. We're talking about potentially hundreds of documents, each requiring individual assessment." James felt a knot forming in his stomach. He'd opened a door that couldn't be closed, and now everyone was walking through it. The briefing continued for another hour, covering security protocols, media management, legal considerations, and diplomatic procedures. By the end, James's head was spinning with information. As people filed out, Patricia pulled him aside. "How are you holding up?" "Honestly, I'm not sure," James admitted. "I was just doing my job, I know. And you did it correctly, but that doesn't make it easier." She paused. "There's going to be pressure from various sides. Some people will say you should have overlooked this. Others will call you a hero for finding it. Ignore both. You followed protocol, that's all that matters." James appreciated her support. "What happens to the investigation now?" "The joint team arrives this afternoon. They'll set up in a secure area and begin the inventory process. You'll likely be asked to give another statement. Walk them through exactly what you found and how you found it." "All right," James said. "Whatever they need." The afternoon brought a convoy of official vehicles to the airport. The joint investigative team consisted of 12 people: archivists, legal experts, intelligence analysts, and security specialists from both the United Kingdom and the United States. They were led by a senior American official named Robert Chen, who had spent 20 years working with classified documents at various government agencies. He shook James's hand when they met. "Captain Whitmore, I understand you're the one who discovered the storage compartment." "Yes, sir. During a routine security sweep." Chen smiled slightly. "Nothing routine about it now. I'll need you to walk me through exactly what happened, step by step." They went to the aircraft, which was now surrounded by even more security. James led Chen and several team members through his inspection process, showing them exactly what he'd checked and in what order. When they reached the private compartment, James pointed to the storage area. "This is where I found the boxes. They were locked with a security seal. Agent Rodriguez provided access after I requested it." Chen examined the compartment carefully, taking notes and photographs. "And what was your first impression when you saw the contents?" James thought back to that moment. "I saw official seals and government markings. I recognized some of them from my security training. My instinct told me this needed to be reported up the chain." "Good instinct," Chen said. "That's exactly what you should have done." Over the next several hours, the investigative team set up their operation in a secured hangar. The boxes were carefully removed from the aircraft, each one photographed and documented before being transported to the examination area. James watched the process from a distance. It was methodical, thorough, and painfully slow. Each box was treated like evidence in a criminal case, which in some ways it might be. Rodriguez was there too, looking tired and stressed. He caught James's eye and walked over. "Quite a situation we've got here." "Yeah," James agreed. "How's your side handling it?" Rodriguez shrugged. "Lots of meetings, lots of lawyers. Everyone's trying to figure out exactly what happened and who's responsible for what." "Do you think there's anything seriously wrong in those boxes?" James asked. The agent was quiet for a moment. "Honestly? I don't know. I was told they were personal records, things the former president had every right to keep. But the way this is blown up..." He trailed off. That evening, the first preliminary findings started to emerge. James wasn't privy to all the details, but he heard through the chain of command that the boxes contained a mix of materials, some clearly personal, some presidential records, and some with current classification markings. The discovery of classified documents changed everything. What had been a diplomatic complication became a potential security breach. More officials arrived. The media coverage intensified. Political commentators on both sides of the Atlantic began weighing in. James tried to stay focused on his regular duties, but it was impossible. He was called for another interview, this time with Chen's team. They wanted to know every detail, what Rodriguez had said, how he'd acted, whether anything had seemed unusual. "Did Agent Rodriguez at any point try to discourage you from examining the storage compartment?" one investigator asked. James thought carefully. "He seemed hesitant, but he didn't directly tell me not to check it. When I insisted it was protocol, he cooperated." "Did he say anything about the nature of the documents?" "He said they were personal records and business documents. Sensitive, but not illegal." The investigator made notes. "Did he appear surprised when you found the boxes?" "No," James said. "He knew they were there. He seemed more nervous about what I'd do with the information." The interviews went on like this for hours. Every word, every gesture, every moment of that inspection was being analyzed and documented. By the end of the week, the investigation had taken over a significant portion of the airport's security operations. The aircraft remained grounded. The media remained camped outside. And James remained at the center of an international incident he'd never wanted to be part of. His wife tried to keep things normal at home, but it was hard. Reporters had found their address. Neighbors were asking questions. His phone rang constantly with blocked numbers he refused to answer. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, she asked him the question he'd been asking himself. "Do you regret finding those documents?" James was quiet for a long time. "No," he finally said. "If I'd ignored them, if I'd let it go, I wouldn't be able to live with myself. I took an oath to do this job properly, and that's what I did. Even though it's made your life complicated?" "Even though," he confirmed. "Some things are more important than convenience." She squeezed his hand. "I'm proud of you." That simple statement meant more to James than any official commendation could. He was doing the right thing, even if the right thing was difficult. The investigation continued through the weekend and into the following week. The team worked around the clock, examining documents, verifying classifications, cross-referencing records. James heard they'd found hundreds of pages of material, some dating back years. Chen provided regular updates to the airport authorities. Some documents were clearly misclassified or declassified. Others were legitimately personal. But a concerning number appeared to be current classified materials that should have been in secure government facilities, not in storage on a private aircraft. The legal implications were staggering. International law, national security regulations, presidential records acts, all of it was being debated by experts who spoke in terms James barely understood. But at its core, the situation was simple. Documents that shouldn't have been on that plane were on that plane, and James had found them. Part 4. Mounting Pressure. The third week of the investigation brought a new kind of pressure that James had never experienced before. It wasn't just the media attention anymore. It was political. He first noticed it during a routine morning briefing when Patricia seemed unusually tense. She'd received calls from government officials on both sides of the Atlantic. People who wanted this situation resolved quickly and quietly. "There are forces at play here that have nothing to do with security," she told James privately after the meeting. "Some people want this to go away. Others want it to blow up bigger. You're caught in the middle." James didn't fully understand what she meant until later that day when he received a visitor. A man in an expensive suit arrived at the airport, asking specifically to speak with Captain Whitmore. He introduced himself as a legal representative, though he was vague about exactly who he represented. "Captain, I'm here to discuss the aircraft situation," the man said, settling into a chair in the conference room. "My clients believe there may have been some misunderstanding about the nature of the materials found." James felt immediately uncomfortable. "I've given my statements to the official investigative team. That's all I can say." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Of course. I'm not asking you to change anything. I'm simply here to provide context. You see, presidential records are a complex area of law. What might appear to be classified material may actually be personal property under certain interpretations. I'm not a lawyer," James said firmly. "I found materials with government seals and classification markings. I reported it. That's the extent of my involvement." "But you understand," the man continued, "that this situation is causing significant disruption. International relations are being strained. Business interests are being affected, all over what might be a simple administrative confusion." James stood up. "I think this conversation is over. If you have legal arguments to make them to the investigative team, not to me." The man's friendly demeanor dropped slightly. "Captain Whitmore, I'm trying to help you understand the bigger picture here. Sometimes flexibility and discretion serve everyone's interests better than rigid adherence to procedure." "Are you asking me to change my statement?" James asked directly. "I'm suggesting that there might be ways to characterize this situation that would be beneficial to all parties involved." James walked to the door and opened it. "This meeting is done. I have nothing more to say to you." After the man left, James immediately reported the conversation to Patricia. Her face darkened as he described what had happened. "They're trying to muddy the waters," she said. "Make it seem like this is all a misunderstanding, that you overreacted." "Did I?" James asked, suddenly uncertain. "Absolutely not. You found classified documents in an unsecured location. That's a serious security issue, no matter how anyone tries to spin it." But the visit shook James more than he wanted to admit. He'd always believed that doing the right thing would be enough, that truth and protocol would win out. Now he was seeing that powerful people didn't always care about truth when it was inconvenient. The pressure increased over the following days. News articles began appearing that questioned James's judgment and experience. Anonymous sources suggested he'd acted hastily, that he'd turned a minor procedural issue into an international incident for attention. James didn't read the articles after the first few. They hurt too much, and he knew engaging with them would only make things worse. But he couldn't avoid hearing about them from colleagues, seeing the headlines when he passed newsstands, feeling the weight of public scrutiny. His family felt it too. His teenage son came home from school upset because classmates had been teasing him about his father being in the news. His wife received cold looks from some neighbors who thought James should have minded his own business. "Maybe we should take a vacation," his wife suggested one evening. "Get away from all this until it settles down." James considered it. The idea of escaping to somewhere quiet, where nobody knew his name or cared about classified documents, was incredibly appealing. But he shook his head. "I can't leave now. The investigation is ongoing and they might need me. Running away would look like I have something to hide." "You don't have anything to hide," she said firmly. "You did your job correctly, I know. But perception matters. If I disappear, people will assume the worst." Meanwhile, the investigative team continued their work. Robert Chen had become someone James checked in with regularly. The American official seemed immune to the political pressure swirling around the case. "How are you holding up?" Chen asked during one of their conversations. "Been better," James admitted. "Had a lawyer visit me earlier this week trying to get me to soften my statements." Chen's expression hardened. "Did he threaten you?" "No, nothing that direct. Just suggested there might be more flexible ways to interpret what I found." "That's pressure, even if it's subtle. You did right by refusing to engage. The facts are the facts, and no amount of legal maneuvering changes what was in those boxes." "How much longer until you finish?" James asked. Chen sighed. "We're making progress, but this is complicated. Some of the documents have multiple classification levels. Some were declassified but still marked as classified. Some shouldn't have been classified in the first place. It's a mess. But there are legitimately classified documents there, right?" "I didn't imagine that." Oh, absolutely. We've found dozens of documents that are currently classified and should never have left secure government facilities. You were completely correct to flag this. That reassurance helped, but it didn't make the pressure easier to bear. James kept going to work, kept doing his job, but the joy he'd once found in it had dimmed. Every aircraft inspection now felt weighted with the possibility of finding something else controversial. One afternoon, Rodriguez contacted him. They'd stayed in occasional touch since the initial discovery, maintaining a professional rapport despite being on opposite sides of an international incident. "Can we meet for coffee?" Rodriguez asked. "Off the record, just two security professionals talking." James agreed, curious about what the agent wanted to discuss. They met at a quiet cafe away from the airport, where they were unlikely to be recognized. Rodriguez looked tired, older than he had 3 weeks ago. "This situation has been hell for everyone involved," he said after they'd ordered. "I want you to know that I don't blame you for any of it." "Thanks," James said. "I wasn't trying to create problems. I know. You were doing exactly what you should have done. If anyone's at fault, it's the people who put me in a position where I was escorting classified materials without proper protocols." James was surprised by the admission. "Were you told what was in those boxes?" Rodriguez hesitated. "I was told they were personal records. I was told the former president had every right to transport them. I was told to facilitate the inspection while maintaining security. But no, I wasn't told there were current classified documents in there. So you got caught in the middle too." "Yeah, and now I'm facing review boards and investigations of my own. My career might be over because I trusted the wrong people." They sat in silence for a moment, two men whose lives had been turned upside down by a routine security sweep. "Do you wish you'd never looked in that compartment?" Rodriguez asked. James had asked himself that question 100 times. "Sometimes, late at night, when I can't sleep and I'm thinking about how much easier life would be if I'd just moved on. But then I remember why we have these protocols in the first place. They exist to prevent security breaches, to protect classified information, to maintain the integrity of the system. Even when following them destroys your peace of mind?" "Even then," James confirmed. "Because if I'd ignored it, if I'd let it slide, I wouldn't be able to look at myself in the mirror. I'd know I'd failed at the one thing I'm supposed to do. Keep people safe." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "That's the answer I expected from you. It's probably the right answer. I just wish doing the right thing didn't come with such a high cost." As James drove home that evening, he thought about cost and consequence. He'd done his job correctly, followed every protocol, acted with integrity, and yet his life had been turned upside down. His family was suffering. His reputation was being questioned. His career might never recover. Was it worth it? He thought about the classified documents that had been found, information that could potentially harm national security if it fell into the wrong hands. He thought about the principle that no one, regardless of position or power, was above the rules meant to keep everyone safe, and he decided yes, it was worth it. Not because it felt good or easy, but because some things mattered more than personal comfort. Security mattered. Integrity mattered. Doing your duty even when it was hard, especially when it was hard, that mattered most of all. His wife was waiting when he got home. "How was your day?" "Difficult," he admitted. "But I'm still standing." She hugged him. "That's all we can ask for. One day at a time, we'll get through this." James held her close, grateful for her support. The investigation would continue. The pressure would persist. The uncertainty would remain. But he had done the right thing, and that would have to be enough. Part 5. The Breaking Point Week. 4 began with news that sent shockwaves through the investigation. The joint team had completed their initial assessment, and the findings were more serious than anyone had publicly acknowledged. James learned about it during an emergency briefing. Patricia stood at the front of the room, her expression grave. "The investigative team has identified over 200 documents with active classification markings. Some are marked top secret. This is no longer just about presidential records or administrative confusion. This is a significant security matter." The room fell silent. 200 classified documents, top secret materials. The weight of what James had discovered suddenly felt crushing. Chen addressed the group next, his voice measured but serious. "I want to be clear about something. Captain Whitmore's actions likely prevented a major security breach. These documents were being transported through international airspace without proper protocols, without secure containers, without the necessary safeguards. If this aircraft had been targeted by hostile intelligence services, the consequences could have been catastrophic. James felt dozens of eyes turned toward him. Some looked at him with new respect. Others seemed to be reassessing their earlier judgments. He kept his expression neutral, but inside his emotions were churning. After the briefing, Chen pulled James aside. "I need you to understand something. What you found, what you reported, it matters. I know you've been under pressure, and I know there are people trying to minimize this. But from a national security perspective, you did exactly what needed to be done." "What happens now?" James asked. "The documents will be returned to proper government custody. There will be further investigations into how this happened and who's responsible. And there will likely be legal proceedings." "Legal proceedings?" Chen nodded grimly. "When classified information is mishandled this significantly, there are usually consequences. I can't say more than that, but you should be prepared for this to continue for quite some time." The news of the findings leaked to the media within hours. James's phone exploded with notifications. The story had moved from the back pages to front-page headlines. Political leaders were making statements. Legal experts were being interviewed. Everyone had an opinion about what should happen next. James tried to maintain his normal routine, but it became increasingly difficult. Reporters camped outside his house. His supervisor suggested he take some time off, work from home until the immediate media frenzy died down. "I'm not hiding," James insisted. "I didn't do anything wrong." "I know you didn't, but sometimes protecting yourself isn't about guilt or innocence. It's about survival." That night, James couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about those 200 documents. Top-secret information. Sitting in boxes on a private plane. Traveling through international airspace. What if he hadn't been thorough? What if he'd just accepted Rodriguez's explanation and moved on? His wife stirred beside him. "Can't sleep?" "Too much in my head," he admitted. She rolled over to face him. "You're second-guessing yourself." "A little. It's just the magnitude of it. 200 classified documents, some marked top secret. What if they'd been stolen? What if hostile governments had gotten hold of them? But they didn't, because you did your job. You found them, you reported them, and now they're being secured properly. Yeah, but look at what it's cost us. The media attention, the pressure, the way our lives have been disrupted." She was quiet for a moment. "Do you want to know what I think?" "Always. I think you're one of the few people who would have done what you did. Most people would have looked the other way. It would have been easier, safer, better for their careers. But you didn't, because that's not who you are. And yes, it's been hard on all of us. But I'd rather be married to a man with integrity than one who takes the easy way out." James felt emotion well up in his throat. "Even when that integrity makes your life harder?" "Especially then. That's when it means the most." He pulled her close, grateful beyond words for her support. Whatever happened next, at least he had her in his corner. The next morning brought a new development. James received an official notification that he would be required to testify before a government committee investigating the handling of classified materials. The hearing would be held in London in 2 weeks. His hand shook slightly as he read the notification. Testifying before a government committee meant public scrutiny on an entirely new level. His words would be recorded, analyzed, potentially used in legal proceedings. Patricia helped him prepare. "You'll be asked to describe exactly what you found and what you did. Stick to the facts. Don't speculate. Don't offer opinions about what should or shouldn't have happened. Just tell them what you saw and what you did about it." "Will there be lawyers?" James asked. "Almost certainly. But you're not on trial. You're a witness. Just tell the truth and you'll be fine." Over the next 2 weeks, James went through the most intense preparation of his life. He reviewed his notes from the inspection dozens of times. He practiced answering questions with a legal advisor provided by the airport authority. He learned to speak carefully, to avoid saying anything that could be twisted or misinterpreted. The night before the hearing, James barely slept. He kept imagining hostile questions, aggressive cross-examination, traps designed to make him contradict himself or admit to some failure in his duties. His wife drove him to the train station the next morning. "Remember," she said before he left, "you're telling the truth about something important. That's all you need to do." The hearing room in London was intimidating. Dark wood paneling, high ceilings, rows of seats for observers and media. The committee members sat at an elevated bench looking down at the witness table where James would sit. He was sworn in, promising to tell the truth. His voice was steady, though his heart raced. The questioning began gently. They asked about his background, his experience, his training. Then they moved to the specific day in question. "Captain Whitmore, can you describe what led you to inspect the storage compartment on the aircraft?" James took a breath and began his account. He described the inspection process, his interaction with Rodriguez, his discovery of the locked compartment. He explained why he'd requested it be opened and what he'd seen inside. "And what was your immediate reaction when you saw the contents?" "I recognized official government seals and classification markings. My training told me these were materials that needed to be reported and verified." "Did anyone try to discourage you from reporting what you'd found?" "No, sir. Agent Rodriguez expressed concern about the sensitivity of the materials, but he didn't tell me not to report it. Once I indicated I needed to contact my supervisor, he cooperated." The questions continued for over an hour. Some committee members seemed genuinely interested in understanding what had happened. Others appeared to be looking for someone to blame, though they couldn't quite pin anything on James. One committee member, a stern older woman, asked the question James had been dreading. "Captain Whitmore, do you think the situation could have been handled more discreetly? Was it necessary to cause such a significant disruption over what might have been an administrative oversight?" James chose his words carefully. "Ma'am, I found what appeared to be classified government documents in an unsecured location on a private aircraft. My duty, both as a security professional and as someone entrusted with protecting public safety, was to report that discovery. The magnitude of the response wasn't something I controlled. I simply followed established protocols. But knowing what you know now, would you do anything differently?" This was the critical moment. James could soften his stance, suggest he might have been too cautious, give them an out. Or he could stand firm. "No, ma'am. I would do exactly the same thing. National security isn't something we gamble with. When in doubt, you report and let the proper authorities make the determination." That's what I did, and I believe it was the right course of action. There was a long pause. The committee members looked at each other. Finally, the chairman spoke. "Captain Whitmore, this committee wants to commend you for your diligence and your adherence to proper security protocols. Your actions, while they may have caused some inconvenience, were absolutely appropriate and may have prevented a serious security breach." James felt a wave of relief wash over him. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but this validation from an official body meant something important. The hearing concluded shortly after. James stepped out of the building into a crowd of reporters shouting questions. Security personnel helped him navigate through them to a waiting car. On the train ride home, James finally allowed himself to relax. The testimony was done. He'd told the truth. The committee had supported his actions. Whatever happened next, he'd survived this critical moment. His phone rang. It was Patricia. "I watched the hearing. You did brilliantly. Professional, honest, straightforward. You should be proud." "Thanks. I'm just glad it's over." "Well, not quite over. But the hardest part is behind you now." When James got home, his family was waiting. His wife hugged him tightly. His son gave him an awkward but genuine high five. Even his teenage daughter, who'd been mortified by all the attention, smiled at him. "How'd it go, Dad?" "It went well," James said. "I told the truth and they listened." Part 6. Resolution and Consequences. The weeks following James's testimony brought a strange kind of calm. The immediate media frenzy had died down, though the investigation continued behind closed doors. James returned to his regular duties, though nothing felt quite the same anymore. He noticed it in small ways. The way colleagues looked at him with a mix of respect and caution. The way security briefings now included references to the aircraft incident as an example of proper protocol. The way his name had become synonymous with thoroughness, for better or worse. One morning, Patricia called him into her office. Her expression was unreadable, which made James nervous. "I've received notification from the investigative team," she said. "They're preparing to issue their final report." James sat forward. "When?" "Next week. They've invited you to a private briefing before the public release. Chen specifically requested you be there." The briefing was held in a secure government facility in Edinburgh, away from the prying eyes of media and public. James arrived to find a small group assembled. Chen, several other investigators, representatives from both the UK and US governments, and a handful of legal advisors. Chen stood at the front of the room with a thick binder. "Thank you all for coming. We're here to review the findings of our investigation before they're made public. Captain Whitmore, I wanted you here because this all started with your discovery, and you deserve to understand what we found." He opened the binder and began presenting. The investigation had uncovered a systematic failure in the handling of presidential records and classified materials. Over a period of several years, documents had been removed from secure facilities without proper authorization or tracking. Some had been declassified improperly. Others had never been declassified at all. The total count of documents with classification markings is 327, Chen said. Of those, 184 remain actively classified. 63 are marked as top secret or above. James felt his stomach drop. The numbers were even worse than he'd imagined. Chen continued. What Captain Whitmore discovered was not an isolated incident or a simple mistake. It was the result of long-standing practices that violated multiple federal statutes and security protocols. A legal advisor spoke next. The Department of Justice will be reviewing these findings to determine appropriate action. We cannot comment on potential charges or proceedings, but the seriousness of these violations cannot be overstated. After the presentation, Chen approached James privately. I wanted you to see this before it goes public. You're going to hear a lot of noise in the coming days. Some people will try to downplay this, others will sensationalize it. I want you to know the objective truth. Your actions prevented these documents from potentially falling into the wrong hands, and your adherence to protocol exposed a serious security problem. I just did my job, James said, though the words felt inadequate given the magnitude of what they'd found. You did your job exceptionally well. A lot of people in your position would have taken the easy way out. You didn't, and that matters. The report was released to the public 3 days later. The media coverage was intense and immediate. News outlets across the world reported on the findings. Political commentators debated the implications. Social media exploded with opinions and arguments. James tried to avoid most of it, but it was impossible to escape entirely. His phone rang constantly with interview requests, which he declined on advice of counsel. Reporters showed up at his workplace again, though security kept them at a distance. What surprised James most was the public reaction. Thousands of messages poured in through social media and the airport's general contact address. Most were supportive, thanking him for his service and his integrity. Some were critical, accusing him of being overzealous or politically motivated. A few were threatening enough that security had to be notified. You've become a symbol, his wife observed one evening as they watched the news coverage. Whether you wanted to be or not. I never wanted any of this, James said. I just wanted to do my job and go home at the end of the day. I know. But sometimes life has other plans. The legal consequences began to unfold over the following months. The Department of Justice announced formal investigations. Lawyers for various parties issued statements. Congressional committees scheduled hearings. The machinery of justice, slow and deliberate, began to turn. James was called as a witness several more times, each appearance adding to his growing exhaustion with the whole process. He told the same story repeatedly. What he'd found, how he'd found it, why he'd reported it. The facts never changed, but the context around them constantly shifted as different parties tried to interpret events to their advantage. Through it all, James maintained his composure and his commitment to the truth. He refused offers to write a book about his experience. He declined lucrative speaking engagements. He turned down requests for exclusive interviews. He just wanted to return to being a regular security officer doing his job. But the reality was that his life had changed permanently. 6 months after the initial discovery, James was called to another meeting with Patricia. This time, her expression was easier to read. She was pleased. I have news, she said. You're being promoted to Chief Security Coordinator for International Operations. James was stunned. What? The decision came from the top. Your handling of the aircraft incident demonstrated exactly the kind of judgment and integrity we need in senior leadership. You'll be overseeing all security protocols for high-profile international flights and coordinating with foreign security services. I don't know what to say. Patricia smiled. Say yes. You've earned this, James. And frankly, we need people like you in positions where they can make a real difference. James accepted the promotion, though it felt surreal. The incident that had nearly destroyed his career was now being cited as the reason he deserved advancement. Life had a strange way of working out sometimes. His new role came with greater responsibility and higher visibility. He helped develop new protocols for inspecting private aircraft, created training programs for security personnel, and served as a liaison with international security agencies. The work was challenging but fulfilling in ways his previous position hadn't been. Rodriguez reached out again about a year after the initial incident. He'd been cleared of wrongdoing in the investigation, having been found to be following orders without full knowledge of what the cargo contained. But his career with the Secret Service was effectively over. He'd resigned and taken a position with a private security firm. No hard feelings, Rodriguez told James during their call. You did what you had to do, and it turned out to be the right thing. I just wish I'd been more skeptical of what I was told. We both learned lessons from this, James replied. Sometimes the hard way is the only way. As the second anniversary of the discovery approached, James reflected on everything that had happened. His life had been turned upside down. His family had endured months of stress and scrutiny. His sense of privacy and normalcy had been shattered. But he'd also discovered things about himself. He'd learned that he could withstand enormous pressure without compromising his principles. He'd proven that doing the right thing, even when it was difficult and costly, was possible. He'd shown that ordinary people in ordinary jobs could make a difference when they refused to look the way. The classified documents were now safely secured in government facilities where they belonged. New protocols ensured that similar situations would be harder to occur in the future. And while the legal proceedings continued to wind their way through the system, James had played his part and could take satisfaction in knowing he'd fulfilled his duty. One evening, as he sat with his family, his son asked him a question. Dad, if you could go back to that day knowing everything that would happen afterward, would you still open that compartment? James thought about it seriously. He thought about the stress, the pressure, the threats, the media scrutiny. He thought about the sleepless nights and the moments of doubt. He thought about how much simpler his life would have been if he'd just walked away. Yes, he said finally, I would, because some things are more important than convenience or comfort. Security is one of them. Integrity is another. And doing your duty, even when it's hard, that's what separates a job from a calling. His wife squeezed his hand under the table. His daughter smiled at him. His son nodded, understanding in a way he probably hadn't before. James had found those documents by accident, but what he'd done with that discovery was no accident. It was a choice, made consciously and repeatedly, to do the right thing regardless of cost. And while he'd paid a price for that choice, he'd also gained something invaluable. The certainty that when tested, he'd measured up to the standards he'd set for himself. That more than any promotion or commendation was what mattered most. Part 7. The Ripple Effect. 2 years after the discovery, James stood in front of a classroom full of new security recruits. His role as chief security coordinator now included training the next generation of officers, and he took this responsibility seriously. Let me tell you about the most important inspection of my career, he began, and the room fell silent. Everyone knew the story, at least the public version. But James was here to teach them the lessons that didn't make the headlines. He described that Tuesday morning, the routine nature of the assignment, the moment he'd found the locked compartment. But he focused on something different than the dramatic discovery. The real test wasn't finding the documents, he explained. It was what I did in the moments after. When Agent Rodriguez seemed nervous, when my instincts told me something was off, I had a choice, trust the protocol or take the easy way out. A young recruit raised her hand. But sir, you knew it was the right thing to do, didn't you? James shook his head. In that moment, I wasn't sure. I knew it was the protocol thing to do, but right and easy aren't always the same thing, and I definitely didn't know how it would turn out. He spent the next hour walking them through the decision-making process, the importance of documentation, the value of following procedures even when pressured to deviate. The recruits listened intently, asking questions, taking notes. After the class, one of the senior instructors approached James. "You're good at this. The recruits really connect with your story." "It's not about my story," James said. "It's about teaching them that they'll face moments where doing the right thing is hard. I want them to be prepared for those moments." The impact of James's discovery had rippled outward in ways he was still discovering. International security protocols had been updated. Training programs had been revised. Government agencies had implemented new tracking systems for classified materials. His one inspection had changed how security was approached across multiple countries, but the personal impact was harder to quantify. James had received letters from security officers around the world, people who'd faced similar dilemmas and found courage in his example. He'd been invited to speak at conferences, though he usually declined. He'd been featured in security journals and textbooks, which felt surreal. The media attention had finally faded, though his name still occasionally appeared in articles about government accountability or security protocols. James was grateful for the relative anonymity. He'd never sought the spotlight, and he was relieved to step back into the shadows. His family had adjusted to their new normal. His son, now preparing for university, had written his college entrance essay about integrity, using his father as an example. His daughter, who'd been mortified by the attention 2 years ago, now spoke proudly of what James had done. His wife continued to be his anchor, keeping him grounded when the weight of everything threatened to overwhelm him. One afternoon, James received an unexpected visitor at his office. It was a man in his 60s, distinguished-looking with the bearing of someone who'd held significant authority. "Captain Whitmore, I'm Richard Pemberton." "I was hoping we could talk." James recognized the name. Pemberton had been a senior official at the Foreign Office, though he'd retired several months ago. "Of course. Please sit down." Pemberton settled into a chair, studying James carefully. "I wanted to meet you in person, to thank you for what you did." "Thank me?" 2 years ago, when you discovered those documents, you set in motion a chain of events that exposed serious weaknesses in how we handle classified information. As someone who spent 40 years in government service, I can tell you that these kinds of systemic problems rarely get addressed until someone forces the issue. James wasn't sure how to respond. "I was just doing my job." "No," Pemberton said firmly. "You were doing what most people should do but often don't. You saw a problem and you reported it, knowing it would cause complications. That takes courage." They talked for over an hour. Pemberton shared stories from his own career, moments when he'd faced similar choices between convenience and duty. He explained how James's actions had influenced policy changes at the highest levels of government. "You probably don't realize the full impact of what you did," Pemberton said as he prepared to leave. "But I wanted you to know that it mattered. It still matters." After he left, James sat quietly in his office processing the conversation. He'd been so focused on surviving the immediate aftermath of the discovery that he hadn't fully considered the long-term implications. But Pemberton was right. The changes that had been implemented, the conversations that had been started, they were all ripples from that one inspection. That evening, James attended a dinner hosted by the airport authority to recognize outstanding security personnel. He'd been to similar events before, but tonight felt different. As he looked around the room at colleagues and friends, he realized how much had changed. Patricia, now promoted to Director of Security Operations, gave a speech about the importance of integrity in their work. She didn't mention James by name, but everyone in the room knew who she was talking about when she described an officer who'd faced immense pressure but never wavered from protocol. After the dinner, several officers approached James. Some thanked him for setting an example. Others asked advice about situations they were facing. A few simply wanted to shake his hand and tell him they respected what he'd done. One older officer, close to retirement, pulled James aside. "You know, I've been doing this job for 35 years. I've cut corners, looked the other way, taken the easy path more times than I'd like to admit. Watching what you went through, seeing how you handled it, it made me think about my own choices. I'm not trying to judge anyone, James said quickly. I know, but sometimes we need reminders of what this job is supposed to be about. You reminded all of us. As James drove home that night, he thought about legacy. He'd never set out to be an example or to change the system. He'd just tried to do his job correctly. But somehow that simple commitment to duty had become something larger. His phone rang. It was Chen calling from Washington. James, I hope I'm not calling too late. Not at all. What's going on? I wanted to let you know that the final legal proceedings from the case concluded today. I thought you'd want to hear it from me rather than reading it in the news tomorrow. What was the outcome? Chen summarized the results. There had been settlements, agreements, and formal acknowledgments of wrongdoing. No one had gone to jail, but significant penalties had been imposed. More importantly, the legal conclusion validated everything James had reported and confirmed the seriousness of the security violations. Your testimony was crucial throughout this process, Chen said. The consistency of your account, your documentation, your professionalism, it all mattered. I appreciate you telling me, James said. There's one more thing. The Attorney General wanted me to pass along a message. She said that in a time when people are often cynical about whether doing the right thing matters, your actions prove that it does. She wanted you to know that. After the call ended, James sat in his car for a moment, letting it all sink in. 2 years of investigations, hearings, legal proceedings, and media scrutiny, and now it was finally truly over. He walked into his house to find his family waiting for him. They'd seen the news alert about the legal proceedings concluding. It's done? His wife asked. It's done, James confirmed. They celebrated quietly, just the four of them, with tea and biscuits in the living room. No grand gestures, no dramatic pronouncements. Just a family grateful that a difficult chapter had finally closed. Later, as James prepared for bed, his son knocked on the bedroom door. Dad, can I ask you something? Always. Do you think I could do what you did? If I was in that situation, would I have the courage to follow through? James considered the question carefully. I think courage isn't something you have or don't have. It's something you choose moment by moment. I wasn't brave when I opened that compartment. I was just thorough. The courage came later when I had to keep choosing to stand by what I'd found. But how do you make that choice when it's so hard? You remember why the rules exist in the first place. They're not there to make our lives difficult. They're there to protect people, to maintain order, to ensure fairness. When you remember that, the choice becomes clearer. His son nodded, seeming to understand. Thanks, Dad. After he left, James's wife looked at him with a slight smile. You've become quite the philosopher. I've had a lot of time to think about all this, James admitted. About what it means, why it matters. And what have you concluded? That ordinary people doing their jobs with integrity, that's what holds everything together. Not heroes or grand gestures. Just regular people making the right choice when it would be easier not to. She kissed him goodnight. That's a good conclusion. As James fell asleep, he thought about the ripples still spreading from that one inspection. The changed protocols, the influenced policies, the inspired colleagues, the lessons taught to recruits. He hadn't set out to change anything. He just tried to do his job correctly. But sometimes that was enough. Sometimes, one person following the rules when it mattered could make all the difference. And that realization, more than any recognition or reward, gave meaning to everything he'd endured. Part 8. Full circle. 5 years had passed since that Tuesday morning when James had boarded a luxury aircraft for what he thought would be a routine inspection. He stood now at the same airport, in the same terminal, watching planes take off and land as he'd done thousands of times before. But everything was different. James was now the director of international security operations, overseeing a team of 50 security professionals across 3 airports. The promotion had come with greater responsibility and influence, allowing him to implement the lessons he'd learned from his experience. The protocols he'd helped develop were now standard across European airports. Training programs emphasized thoroughness over convenience. Young officers learned about the aircraft incident as a case study in proper procedure. James's name had become part of security lore, though he remained uncomfortable with the attention. Today was special for a different reason. James had been invited to speak at an international security conference in London. The theme was Integrity in Action: How Individual Choices Shape Systemic Change. He was the keynote speaker. As he prepared his notes in his office, Patricia stopped by. She was retiring next month after 40 years in security work. Nervous? She asked. A bit, James admitted. I've done training sessions and small presentations, but this is different. There will be security chiefs from 40 countries there. You'll be fine. Just tell them what happened and what you learned. That's all they need to hear. Patricia, before you retire, I wanted to thank you for supporting me during all of that, for having my back when it would have been easier to distance yourself. She waved off the sentiment. I didn't do anything special. I saw an officer doing his job correctly and made sure he had the support he needed. That's what good leadership is supposed to do. Still, it meant everything to me. After she left, James returned to his notes. He'd decided to structure his speech around 3 lessons: the importance of protocol, the courage to stand firm under pressure, and the long-term impact of ethical choices. The conference hall in London was impressive, filled with hundreds of security professionals from around the world. James took the stage feeling both honored and humble. These were people who protected airports, government buildings, borders, and critical infrastructure. They faced difficult decisions every day. I'm going to tell you about the most routine inspection of my career, James began, inverting his usual opening line. The audience leaned forward, intrigued. Because that's what it was supposed to be. Routine, standard, unremarkable. He walked them through that day, but this time he focused on the moments of choice. The moment when he could have accepted Rodriguez's explanation and moved on. The moment when he could have documented the findings but downplayed their significance. The moment when he could have yielded to pressure from lawyers and politicians. Every job in security comes with moments like these, James said. Moments where following protocol is inconvenient, where doing the thorough thing creates complications, where the easy path looks very appealing. And in those moments, we have to choose what kind of professionals we want to be. He shared the aftermath, the investigations, the pressure, the personal cost, but he also shared the outcomes. The recovered classified documents, the improved protocols, the systemic changes that had made security stronger. I'm not a hero, James said firmly. I'm a security officer who followed the rules when it mattered. That's not heroic. That's the baseline of what this job requires. But somewhere along the way, we started treating basic competence and integrity as exceptional. We shouldn't. It should be the standard. The audience was silent, absorbing his words. James could see heads nodding, people making notes. The real question isn't whether you'll face a situation like mine. The question is whether you'll recognize it when it comes, because it probably won't look dramatic. It'll look routine. It'll look like something you could easily overlook or minimize, and that's exactly when it matters most. He concluded with a challenge. Go back to your airports, your facilities, your posts. Look at the routine inspections you do every day. Ask yourself, am I being thorough because it's easy, or am I being thorough because it's right? The answer to that question will define your career and possibly prevent the next security breach. The applause was long and genuine. Afterward, dozens of security professionals approached James to share their own stories, to ask questions, to thank him for his example. One woman, a security chief from an Asian airport, told him, "Last month, I found something irregular during an inspection. My supervisor suggested I overlook it to avoid complications. But I remembered reading about your case. I reported it. It turned out to be significant. You gave me the courage to follow through." Stories like this reminded James why the difficult years had been worth it. His one decision had encouraged others to make similar choices, creating a ripple effect of integrity across the security profession. That evening, as James took the train back to Scotland, he received a text from his son, who was now working as a junior analyst at a government security agency. "Saw your speech was trending on security forums. They're calling it the best keynote of the decade. Proud of you, Dad." James smiled. His children had grown up watching him navigate the consequences of doing the right thing. They'd seen the stress, but they'd also seen the resolution, and both of them had chosen careers in public service, committed to making a difference. When James arrived home late that night, his wife was still awake, reading in bed. "How was London?" she asked. "Good. The speech went well. Lots of interesting conversations afterward." She set down her book. "You know, 5 years ago when all of this started, I was terrified. I didn't know if we'd survive it as a family, if your career would recover, if life would ever feel normal again. And now I see it differently. That experience tested us in ways we never expected, but it also showed us what we're made of. You never compromised, never took the easy way out, and our kids learned what integrity actually looks like, not as an abstract concept, but as a lived reality. James sat on the edge of the bed. It cost us a lot, though. The stress you went through, the attention on the kids, the disruption to our lives. It did. But we got through it together and we're stronger for it. I wouldn't trade that for anything. The next morning, James returned to his office to find an official letter waiting for him. It was from the Cabinet Office in London, informing him that he'd been selected to receive the Order of the British Empire for his services to national security. He stared at the letter in disbelief. An OBE. It was one of the highest civilian honors in the country, typically reserved for people who'd made extraordinary contributions to British society. Patricia was the first person he told. She laughed with delight. It's about time they recognized what you did properly. You've earned this 10 times over. I just did my job, James protested, though he was deeply moved. Yes, but you did it exceptionally well under extraordinary circumstances. Accept the honor, James. You've earned the right to feel proud. The investiture ceremony was held 6 months later at the palace. James wore his dress uniform, his family beside him, as he received the medal from a senior royal. The moment felt surreal, standing in the grand hall where so many distinguished people had been honored before him. Afterward, at the reception, James was approached by Chen, who'd flown in from Washington for the occasion. Congratulations, Chen said, shaking his hand warmly. This is well deserved. I still can't quite believe it's real, James admitted. Believe it. What you did changed how we think about security protocols on both sides of the Atlantic. That's not a small thing. Rodriguez was there too, having been invited as one of James's guests. The two men had maintained an unlikely friendship over the years, bonded by their shared experience. You've come a long way from that Tuesday morning, Rodriguez said. We both have, James replied. Rodriguez had rebuilt his career with the private security firm and was now their chief of operations. The incident that had nearly destroyed both their careers had ultimately made them better at their jobs. As the reception wound down, James stood with his family, looking at the medal in its case. His wife squeezed his hand. What are you thinking? She asked. I'm thinking about the young officer I was 5 years ago, standing on that tarmac, not knowing that my life was about to change completely. If I could go back and tell him what was coming, what would I say? What would you say? I'd tell him it's going to be harder than you can imagine. The pressure will be intense, the scrutiny will be overwhelming, and there will be moments when you'll doubt yourself. But I'd also tell him that on the other side of all that difficulty is something valuable, not just recognition or awards, but the knowledge that you stood for something when it mattered. His daughter, now studying international relations at university, spoke up. Do you think you would have done it differently if you'd known what was coming? James considered the question seriously. No, because knowing the cost and choosing to do it anyway, that's when integrity really means something. It's easy to do the right thing when there are no consequences. The test is whether you'll do it when the consequences are severe. They drove home that evening, the medal carefully stored in James's bag. As they passed the airport where it had all begun,